Beautiful. Well, good morning, church. About a month ago, I was thinking about what to share this morning. And of course, I wanted to continue sharing my personal testimony like I have done over the past 2 years. But this time, I wanted to start by looking at the story of Elijah in the Bible. A couple of weeks later from getting that idea, we had the guest speaker, Randall Green, here. And who would have thought that out of a whole Bible, he would pick Elijah to talk about? Thankfully, Randall chose to speak about Elijah and the revival on Mount Carmel in 1 Kings 18, which was the perfect intro into what I want to talk about today, the next chapter. That's right, we are going to be looking at Elijah of 1 Kings chapter 19. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, also how he had executed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time." And when he saw that, he arose and ran for his life, and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he prayed that he might die, and said, "It is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." Hang on a sec. Let's just do a recap on 1 Kings chapter 18 version of Elijah. In 1 Kings chapter 18, he was fearlessly confronting evil authority. He set the stage for God to do the impossible, and willingly put himself in an uncomfortable, dangerous situation to tell people the truth. I mean, what an awesome dude. What Christian would not want that to be on their resume? Like, come on. But in 1 Kings 19, we find a totally different person. He's running for his life from the same rulers. He loses hope that God will do the impossible and wants to remove himself from the responsibility of telling the truth. See, Elijah is done with the calling on his life. He doesn't want to be responsible for quitting, so he instead tries to get God to take his life so that it will be on God. He doesn't like where the next chapter is heading. Therefore, he doesn't want it to continue. Let's read on. Then as he lay and slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." Then he looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on coals and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came back the second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." So he arose and ate and drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights as far as Horeb, the mountain of God. God does the exact opposite of what he asks. Instead of killing him, he gives him the 3 things that will make him survive: food, drink, and rest. Because God's response isn't to close the book. He then takes Elijah on a 40-day journey to Mount Horeb. And there he went into a cave and spent the night in that place. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" So he said, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life." Then he said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still, small voice. This is my favorite bit. God then comes back to him the next day. At this point, we see that. And he asks him what he's doing there. To which Elijah basically replies, "Life isn't fair." God then causes a great wind, an earthquake, and a fire to happen before speaking to Elijah in a still small voice. God's point to Elijah is that sometimes we have expectations of who God is and what he will do for us. The three examples God used to illustrate his point are all forms of elements that he has appeared in before. The wind in Exodus chapter 14, the earthquake in Exodus chapter 19, and the fire in Exodus chapter 3, just to name one example for each of them. But he chose not to appear in them then. And we'll talk about this a bit later. But ultimately, God can see the bigger picture. He knows how the story ends, and he knows that the story doesn't end in this chapter. Now, how does this tie in with my testimony? I've had a bit of an Elijah year. In September, I reached my lowest point. My fiance and I broke up. I quit my physically and mentally draining job at Hungry Jack's. I had family members unconsciously hurt me, and to top it all off, I fell ill because of the emotional, physical, mental burnout that I was experiencing at the time. This year's chapter was not turning out like I wanted. I was ready for the chapter to be over. Interestingly, though, this wasn't the first season of hardship in this year, but instead the first time I wanted the chapter to be rewritten. You see, in January this year, Aaron and I went through a different challenging time when someone who knew both of us started spreading lies about Aaron, which they thought were true, but weren't, and they didn't come to us directly to do a fact check. That time was actually a lot more mentally draining than our breakup. But just like Elijah on Mount Carmel, facing the odds, I believed God would move, and he did. But in September, my whole life seemed to crumble, and just like Elijah, I didn't like where the chapter was heading, so I just wanted to run from it. Thankfully, I knew I was going to need some time alone to try and make sense of the chaos, and so I booked myself a trip away to Venus Bay. Anyone been to Venus Bay? It is beautiful. Thankfully, it doesn't take 40 days and nights to get there. I didn't have that much time. But I knew that this was going to be my Mount Horeb moment. Just me and God to sort out where the next chapter is heading. I could have let everything that happened to me crush me. But instead, it drove me to seek answers from God. And even though I don't have all the answers I want, I know that God is in control of my story, and he's not done with me yet. And I came away with a couple of lessons which I would like to share with you. Lesson 1, don't read the last chapter first. We don't need to know the future, we just need to know the God of our future. As much as I would love to know how things will play out in my future, that is not actually beneficial for me. Matthew 6:34 says, "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." Knowing my future would mean knowing about all the not so great things that are going to happen, which would probably result in me trying to avoid them instead of letting God move in them. Instead, all we need to know is that God holds our future in his hands and that he will take care of us. Lesson 2, you're not the author. Don't try and take God's role in writing your story. God can see the bigger picture and we can't. And just like we mentioned in lesson 1, that is a good thing. But let's get a glimpse of the bigger picture. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 says, "For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says the Lord. Thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope." Bad things happen in our lives, but they are proof that God hasn't finished writing your story. Pastor Tony said this several months ago here, if you're still breathing, then God is not finished with you yet. This has really stuck with me because when things got turned upside down in my life, it felt like it had no meaning. I really had to keep telling myself that this is not the end. God is just not finished with me yet. Which leads into lesson 3, which came to me while typing my notes this week. Limiting God to move in one specific way will result in disappointment. I mentioned earlier that God used the 3 different elements and then didn't appear in any of them. I think part of the reason was that he was challenging Elijah to not limit God to doing things a certain way. Instead, by using the still small voice, God showed Elijah that there is always a new way for God to move. The question is, are we open to allowing God to move in a different way in our lives? I had expectations on how my life was going to play out. So when it didn't go as I wanted, I blamed God for not moving. But this was not true. God was moving mightily. But because I had my expectations of how I thought God should move, I was disappointed in him. And for several weeks, I missed seeing God's perspective because I was so focused on my own. So ultimately, you are going to have many different chapters in your life. Some are going to be amazing, unreal, while others are going to make you want to cut the chapter short. The question is, church, are you willing to trust the author of your life with the next chapter? So before we close up there, I'd like to invite the band back up again. If I can get you guys to come on back up. I actually want to close it with the goodness of God. Because that song actually has had a lot of different special moments in my life. It was actually the first, one of the songs that got played when I first did my, when I first spoke at Kui Rup. It was one of the songs that got played. And ultimately, it's a song that carries me through because it talks about the goodness of God. And we can go through life in the good moments and go, yeah, I can sing that song. But can we go through life and say, oh, at this moment, life isn't looking great, but I still believe in the goodness of God. And so ultimately, this is a song that I have on repeat in my song list because ultimately there are times where I need to just remind myself that God is still good. That even though my situation isn't good, God is still good. So I want us to just all stand and let's sing through this again. And yeah, just declare it, church. Let's just declare God's goodness to us.